All right, welcome to the Curious Show live taping. It is too early. Hold on a second. Welcome to today's live taping of the Jew Curious Show podcast. And I use the word tape in a nostalgic sense. We're recording to digital media and we are here live on YouTube. I'll ask that if anybody is watching right now on YouTube Live, you never know, go ahead and give me a shout out in the chat. Let me know your name, what I can call you by. Sometimes the handles on YouTube Live are a little bit hinky. It's like crack pipe 420. That's actually a terrible thing to say. Some string of letters and numbers. I don't really know what to call you by. So I can call you by that, or I can call you by your name. Let me know where you're coming from so I can give you a shout out to your location. I love to see the diverse crowd that tunes in for these episodes. So what we're doing today, just to frame it for you, is we're doing a live studio recording for the Jew Curious Show. This is going to appear on episode 32. We just dropped 29. We're dropping 30 today, 31 tomorrow, and then probably Thursday of this week. This will be episode 32. The topic of today's show is imposter syndrome, specifically how it is experienced by people who convert to Judaism or people who are considering converting to Judaism. And the reason that I'm doing it is that I've gotten to know a lot of members of my audience in my YouTube channel and in the podcast, and I've reached out to them and say, okay, what are your biggest fears? What are your biggest concerns? And one thing that people are most frustrated by is this anxiety of wondering, will I be accepted in the Jewish community? And it's not just for converts, right? It's for people who are born Jewish, for people who this is their inheritance, but maybe they didn't connect to it or they haven't connected it to it in a while, and they want to know, am I going to be welcome when I come back, right? Are people going to know that I don't know what's going on, or I don't know as much about what's going on as I think everybody else does? And so I wanted to make this show today, first to just call out that this is real. This imposter syndrome is real, and to tell you my story, how I've dealt with it, and also to give you some maybe tips and strategies or things you might want to think about to help you overcome it yourself. Because what worked for me might not work for you, but I want you to know that this was real for me as well. And it took me years to kind of work through this. It's much less of a concern in my life right now, thank goodness. And I have some experience working with people who have suffered from this imposter syndrome and have helped them through it. And so I want to share with you what I have learned. Before we get into it, I want to give a big shout out to Kathy. And let's see, Milo is here, thank goodness. Let's see, Larry is here from Arizona. Jason Brown, who I believe is here from Ireland. Oh my goodness. So we've got so far SoCal with Kathy. We've got Denmark. We've got Arizona. We've got Ireland in the house. We've got Val is here from Florida. So we are bi-coastal and international here on the Jew Curious Show. So thank you everybody for chiming in. Feel free to throw in your questions in the chat about this topic. In just a second, I'm going to kind of transition into podcaster mode and put on my radio voice and say, welcome to the Jew Curious Show. Actually, that's Ron Snow's job. He's my voiceover guy. So just really grateful for everybody for doing this learning with me today. If you're watching this on the replay and you have questions, you didn't get into the chat, feel free to put your questions in the comments below this video. And with that, let's get into podcast mode. So how should I do this intro? I usually start with hero, and then say something smart. So let's do that. Hero, have you ever experienced imposter syndrome, feeling like you don't belong or that other people will think you don't belong? In today's episode 32 of the Jew Curious Show, we are going to talk about imposter syndrome. I'm going to share my version of this with you, how I overcame it, and hopefully give you some ideas on how you can overcome it as well, right after this bass. Okay, this is where I need to really put some live music here in the live broadcast, but you get the idea. Thank you, Ron. Thank you, Joey. And thank you, Hero, for once again tuning into the Jew Curious Show podcast. That is awfully presumptuous of me. Maybe this is your first time here. And if it is, I highly recommend that you subscribe to the Jew Curious Show. We've got about 30-some episodes in the can, and if you subscribe, you can auto-magically download all of those episodes and get notified when there are new episodes available. We have a lot of great conversations with rabbis, with artists, with Jewish leaders of all kinds, and what I'll call Stam Yidden, which is a kind of a Yiddish phrase for just regular Jews, or the Jews in the pews, as rabbis call them. So this is a great place to not only get to know about Judaism, but also to get to know about Jewish people. And as our friend Ron Snow said, this, for me, has been the path to a life of greater meaning, a life of greater joy, a life of greater human connection and personal growth. And I hope that you can find that here as well, Hero. Now, what are we talking about today? First, just do a little aside. For anybody who's watching this on YouTube, if you're watching one of my YouTube videos for the first time, you should know that there are about 170 to 180 videos on this channel about various Jewish topics, some long-form conversations like this one, as well as some videos as little as 90 seconds. If you wanted to learn everything about the Jewish Bible in 90 seconds, we've got a video on that as well. How to celebrate Shabbat, what is Shabbat, various Jewish words you might hear. So after we've had this discussion, feel free to roam around this channel, see what it is you want to learn, and I'd be delighted to learn with you. I will suggest that you subscribe to this YouTube channel because that's the best way to get notified when new materials come out. I'm doing a live session about every weekday now, and so if you want to be in the know of the topics of the live sessions that we're doing, subscribe to this channel. You'll get notified. You'll see what's on there, and you can decide if you want to jump into these live Q&As with me, get your questions answered live. And right now what we're doing is a live recording of the Jew Curious Show podcast. That means that the recording of this live session will be released as a podcast, and how you can help Jew Curious people know more is by asking great questions on this topic, or asking what you think aren't such great questions. That's okay. There are no bad questions here for me, and there's nothing you could do that's going to embarrass me on this podcast, because I have had the most embarrassing questions myself along my spiritual journey. So ask your questions today, and when I answer them, not only will I be answering you, I'll be answering the listeners of this show, because chances are, Hero, if you have a question, a lot of people have that question, and you could be helping them out by asking it. You might hear a little interference in the background. It is parrot season here in Southern California, and for the last few days, we've had flocks of parrots going by and tweeting, not with smartphones, but actually with their beaks. So let's jump into it. Let's see who else has joined us here today. Joining us for our live studio session, we have Kathy from Southern California. We have Milo from Denmark. We have Larry from Arizona. We have Jason from Ireland. Let's see. We have Val from Florida. We have Carla here from Southern California. We have Teresa from Cyprus. We have a new face. I don't know if I've seen you here before. If I've missed you, if I've missed you in the past, I'm so sorry. This is Tristan from Oklahoma is here today. We've got a message held here for review. Let me see what that says. Sometimes, oh, that's a nice thing. Thank you, Jeffrey. That's really pleasant. So I'll just block you from now on. that's the fun thing from doing stuff live. You get some kooks. So I'll throw that word back at you, kook. Aaron is here from Florida. Let's see. We have Fortune Psych from New Jersey. We have Sandra coming in, and I'm so glad to see you here, Sandra, from Goa, India. We are in Asia, y'all. This is amazing to me that this message is reaching Jew-curious people quite literally from around the world. So let's jump into it. What is imposter syndrome, and how specifically does that affect people who are converting to Judaism, who are returning to Judaism from maybe some time away and feel that for whatever reason they don't belong, or more importantly, feel that other people will decide that they don't belong. And I think the best way to start is just to tell my story. As many people know, and maybe people here today don't know this already, I became Jewish at the age of 25, which was approximately 18 years ago. Let's say it'll be 19 years this summer. So I was fully an adult when I became Jewish, and came into a family that Jewish for as many generations as people could count. Part of the family was Shoah survivors, people who had survived the Holocaust and immigrated to America after that, and built a family into a community of conservative Jews. That's the denomination that we were a part of. And let's see, this was back about the year 2000, and this. Excuse me, having a little bit of a brain bubble here this morning. That's the joy of live broadcasting. And so I go into a world where everybody seems to know what's going on, and I'm the new guy. I know absolutely zero of what is going on. As far as I know, the first time I met a Jewish person, I was 10 years old. And this was when I was living in a small town in the southernmost county of West Virginia. And the people I met were friends of my parents, fellow professors at this little college in this little college town, a town of 1,236 people. And as far as I know, this was the only Jewish family in that town. And so for many years of my life, my data for what being and doing Jewish meant was two people. Right. And then I went to a boarding school for high school. There were a lot more Jewish students there. Got to know a little bit more, got to know several more Jewish people, a little bit more about what Jewish people did, how Jewish people thought about things or behaved. Turns out pretty much just like everybody else there. And so it was only in college that I had my first Jewish girlfriend, who then became my wife. And then a few years later, I converted. And again, I'm coming to this really not knowing how to do anything. I take a conversion class, and I know a lot about Jewish thought, but reading a book and taking a class with a small number of people in the rabbi's office is not the same as knowing what to do in Jewish settings. And so I was terribly nervous every time I went into Jewish settings. Am I going to do something wrong? Am I going to do something offensive? Or am I going to do something that clearly singles me out as not one of the tribe? Am I going to put on my talit wrong? Am I going to wear my kippah sideways, or not wear one when it's appropriate, or wear one when it's not appropriate? I don't know. Different communities have different standards. So I was terribly afraid of thinking that people were thinking that I was an imposter, that I was pretending to be Jewish. As much as my rabbi told me once I converted, I am just as Jewish as any other Jew who had been born Jewish. That is the essence of imposter syndrome. You're in a community of people of shared values doing the things that they do, or wanting to do the things that they want to do, but not feeling fully integrated. And most concerned that other people will see you as an imposter. And this doesn't just happen in this context. I've talked to entrepreneurs who were, making great change in the world through their businesses, and were worried that other people would think they were a fake, that they were a phony, that they didn't have the real deal. This happens in so many different settings. But today we're talking about the special case of Jewish converts, or people coming to Judaism for the first time in a while, who feel like everybody else knows what's going on but me, and people will see me as less than, or see me as inauthentic, or not really part of the tribe that I desperately want to be a part of. And so I just wanted to name that as one of the most pressing concerns that a lot of my students and people I talk to in the world have. So let's jump into the chat here for a second. Just stick to the pleasant stuff. We have Woolen Bullet is back from Nova Scotia. Hey, Rebecca, glad to see you. Higa Girl Steph is here. We've got, let's see, Jason is back from Ireland. And Suzanne is here from Northern California. And she says, I feel the same fear, and I am already a Jew. Talked about this a little bit in yesterday's broadcast, where what I see as one of the greatest tragedies in Jewish life today, discounting anti-Semitism, discounting, or not talking, I won't discount it, not talking for a second about the Nazis like appeared in the chat here a second ago. We're going to get over that. They've got some other axe to grind, I guess. But one thing that strikes me as really tragic is when a Jewish person goes into a Jewish space. It could be a Passover Seder. It could be a synagogue service. And the one place where they are supposed to feel safe and native in a world that challenges people's ideas and identity, a synagogue should be a safe haven. A synagogue should be a home, a safe haven for every Jew. And people go into that space, people who are fully Jewish, whether by birth or by adoption or by conversion, and they feel like foreigners, right? Because you go into that space and people are legit speaking a different language, right? often the services are in Hebrew, or if it's not in Hebrew, they're using Yiddish, or they're using these code words. They're using, they have behaviors that everybody else seems to play along with as kind of a cultural norm. But maybe you don't know those things, right? Because it's your first time there, or it's your first time there in a while. This reminds me of one of my favorite / least favorite stories from the Tanakh in Sefer Shoftim in the book of Judges, the story of Yiftach. If you're reading a translation or transliteration, Jephthah is often how his name is spelled. But Yiftach was a little bit of an outsider, right? He was ostracized by his family. He was the oldest son, but not necessarily of everybody else's mother. Like his father had some relations, so he was the oldest son of the father, but everybody else had the same mother who was the father's wife, and so they ostracized him. They kicked him out of town, and only later, when they really needed him to help fight a battle, did they bring him back, because having been kicked out of his home, he became a bit of an outlaw, right? It said he went into the big city, he assembled a gang of tough guys, and they were highwaymen, they were marauders, right? Because what else was he going to do? He was disinherited. But when they needed him to fight a battle, they brought him back. And so, as an aside, sort of the most popular version of this, or sort of the part of this story that we talk about the most, is when he came back, he made this oath to God that said, okay, God, I'm fighting for my family, I'm fighting for my tribe. Here's my vow. If I am victorious, if you help me in this pursuit, I will sacrifice the first thing that comes out of my door when I return. And so he goes to battle, he is victorious, he comes back home, and this was sort of a legit vow, because my understanding of the story is back in the day when people had livestock in their house, or maybe they had like a 2-story house and the barn was on the lower floor. So he had every reason to suspect that the first thing that was going to come out of his house was a cow or a goat or a chicken or something like that. But it was his daughter. The first creature that came out of his house to greet him was his daughter. And so he was put in a real bind about the vow that he had made to God. And there are different views on how this story turns out. Some say he fulfilled the vow at his daughter's request. But the way she phrases things, she says she doesn't mourn her life, she mourns her fertility. She's a virgin. She hasn't been married yet, and that's what she is in mourning of. So some say that she wasn't legit sacrificed; she became a nun, because we don't really do human sacrifices. That was a rule pretty early on for us. But that's not what I want to talk about. what happens after that, what happens after this tragedy, whether whether the sacrifice is fulfilled or whether she becomes celibate and doesn't have a family, which was also a tragedy for Yiftach, who presumably wanted grandchildren. He became the king or the warlord or the headman of this tribe, and he was faced with another difficult situation. There was some infighting between the tribes. One tribe that said, "Hey, Yiftach," there was a different, I think it was the Ephraimites, said, "Hey, Yiftach, you went to battle against these guys. Why didn't you include us? Like, we could have helped you out, and now we don't get to share in the booty, the spoils of your conflict, and we're mad about that." So they started another fight. And this wasn't like an us-them, this was an us-us, right? This was two tribes of Jews fighting against each other, and their territories were separated by a river, and there was a bridge across that river. And so one side would send spies, right, pretending to be defectors. Like the Ephraimites said, "Okay, we're going to send some people across this bridge to join Yiftach, and but we're secretly going to spy on him or sabotage things." And Yiftach was hip to this. Like, he figured, okay, this might happen, so we better test these people coming across the bridge. And so as people came across the bridge, he's like, "Hey, happy to have you. You're an Ephraimite, but are you going to join us? Or are you a spy? Or are you really with the Yiftach family cause?" And they said, "No, dude, I'm totally with you, right? I'm defecting, right? I want to be a part of your thing. And I'm one of you, right? I was never really into the whole Ephraimite business. I actually grew up where you grew up, and so I'm just coming back home." And so Yiftach says, "Okay, that's cool. Do me a favor. Say the word shibolet." And they would attempt to. And they would attempt to say shibolet, but instead they said sibolet, because this word was pronounced differently on different sides of the river. I had a good friend growing up who was an Italian national, and he told me about his family in Italy, where people from villages just, 2 villages apart couldn't understand each other because the regional dialects were so distinct. So this made a lot of sense to me reading this, that people from either side of the river might say the same word, like it means like a sheaf or a type of grain or something like that, where one side would say shibolet and the other side would say sibolet, but it's how one side could tell that the other side didn't belong. And that's why in English today, shibboleth, which is a poor transliteration via some German scholars, shibboleth means like a code word, which it means like inside language or a jingoism or jargon, what separates one person from a tribe or what separates one tribe from another. And the reason I'm telling this story is that we have a lot of that in the Jewish world, in a sense that we have inside language, we have phrases, we have rituals that determine whether somebody knows what's going on and is in or out. And it doesn't mean that you're excluded if you're out. It just you're sort of identified a little bit differently. And so when a person is coming to a synagogue for the first time, they see people are standing up at the same time. They are bowing at the same time in the same fashion, right? It sounds like people are kind of singing along with the Hebrew in the service. And the immediate impression is everybody here knows this but me. And because I don't know it and because I'm not doing it, they will know that I am an outsider. And this prevents people from coming back a second time. And for me, that is a tragedy. And also, it's the way through this imposter syndrome. So I want to bust a myth for you, if I can. When you come to a synagogue and you think everybody knows what's going on but you, that is almost never entirely true. There are a lot of people there who have been doing the prayer service their whole lives, and they might be in their 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, what have you. And yes, they are really familiar with the right things to do during a Jewish service, or the right thing to do in making small talk at a kiddush lunch. But most people don't, right? Most people are coming to that service, and they may get part of it, but they don't really understand all of it. And they may be just as nervous as you that other people will see them as somehow not belonging or inferior, right? They're just as scared as you are. But the difference is they have made the decision to come back again and again and again. And every time you come back, you adopt a little bit more knowledge, right? You get the gist of, okay, I don't know when I'm supposed to stand, but I'm going to stand up when everybody else stands up, and I'm going to sit down when everybody else sits down, right? When somebody starts a sentence with Baruch atah, when a certain part, everybody makes this noise, Baruch Shemo. And that's just a part of sort of the call and response of Jewish services. And that means Baruch Baruch Shemo, which means blessed is he and blessed is his name, which is a little call and response thing that people know how to do. And people say it very quickly, so it just sounds like Baruch Shemo. And you think, okay, that's some word. I don't even understand what that is. I don't know if I'm saying it at the right time. But you'll get it if you come back. And so let me just do a little bit of a digression. I'm going to check in the chat, see what kind of questions people have. Let's see. We got Drake back. Drake has spent some time in the Gujarat. I forget where Drake is from. Let's see. We got Dublin. We got, let's see. Felipe Lima is here. We've got, let's see. Got some great Fortune Psych and Jason in the chat talking to each other. Really love this. So I'm going to tell you people, if you want to ask me questions in the chat, that's cool. If you just want to chat with each other, that's totally cool as well. One of the rules of the Jew Curious School and the Jew Curious podcast and this community in general is that this particular teacher doesn't mind if kids are gossiping in the back of the room, right? Because it's more important to me that you form a community among each other than just about anything else, because that's my favorite thing about this is not just the learning that we do together, but the community that we form around it. So let me go back to my story. I've given some Torah teaching, some highfalutin ideas about imposter syndrome. Let me tell you how I personally got over it. The first thing I did was, as I said, I just kept showing up. I just kept coming back week after week after week to services, sometimes within the week. After I first converted, I was living in Knoxville, Tennessee, and I started going to the Daily Minyan there. And I don't even remember if it was a daily minyan or just a Monday, Thursday minyan, but I just started showing up with these folks, and we go out to breakfast afterwards, and I got to know everybody, and people saw that by showing up, I was serious, that I wasn't just sort of this fly-by-night guy that was going to come in and come out, and they said, okay, you're serious, then we're going to start depending on you to show up, to make minyan, to make our prayer quorum. And that helped me feel a little bit more like I was on the inside, a little bit less like I was an imposter who didn't belong there. And yet, this imposter syndrome persisted because I didn't know everything, and I didn't know everybody, and I didn't know the right thing to do in different settings. And I would sometimes put my foot in my mouth and say things that were offensive to people that I had no idea that they would be offensive to people. And this persisted until I went to rabbinical school. And I remember first when I told my rabbi I wanted to go to rabbinical school, he said, the answer to your first question is, that I didn't ask yet, the answer to your first question is yes, a convert can go to rabbinical school. And so he thought I might have been worried about that. And I'll say that question was kind of in the back of my mind because I hadn't met any rabbis who were converts at that point. Little did I know that at least within the conservative movement, there's several convert rabbis who become ordained every year. But I was like the one of two in my class of 17. But anyway, sort of dispelled that. But I got to know that this was a thing. There were plenty of convert rabbis out there. And I'm going to tell a secret. We have our own Facebook group, by the way. Don't look for it. It's a secret. But so there are lots of secret Facebook groups out there. But I happen to be in a community of rabbis who converted to Judaism. And we love hanging out and talking about that because we have unique challenges, I'll say, still feeling like one of the tribe of rabbis. Even into school, I knew that, okay, I was fully devoted to this thing. How could I be an imposter when I was in that deep? And yet, I still wondered whether other people would take me seriously as a rabbi. And I wondered this until I got to Israel. Now, this is a part of my personal story of overcoming imposter syndrome. I'm not recommending this as a prescription. Your mileage may vary. It was a little bit expensive because it was actually the semester that I studied in Israel. And you don't have to go to Israel to overcome your imposter syndrome, but this is how it worked for me. On my, I'll say, first full day in Israel, like I got in late at night, like 4 a.m, crashed on the couch with the people I was staying with, woke up early. We went out and had like a late breakfast. And then we went to the old city. We went to the city of David. And we went straight to the Kotel, right? The what people call the Western Wall or the Wailing Wall. This big wall that wasn't necessarily part of the temple per se, but was like a retaining wall on the Temple Mount. And we go into the plaza of the Kotel, and there are lots of people there praying, and it's kind of a big tourist attraction. And so there are lots of people there, clearly from all sorts of different cultures. But I was there on my first day for studying in Israel as a part of becoming a rabbi. And I went to the wall, and I put my hand on it, and this kind of electric feeling shot through me. And completely involuntarily, I started crying. It like just couldn't resist it. It overcame me. And I was just overwhelmed with that feeling. And I kind of walked away, dried my face. It was like, I'm not crying, you're crying. It's my allergies kicking in today. But I remember that. And then I went back a second time, maybe later that week, and I approached the wall and I put my hand on it again. Thinking, okay, is it going to be the same feeling? Was that just this sort of first time thing? There's something called Jerusalem syndrome where people of all stripes, faiths, backgrounds, whatever, get to Jerusalem and there's just a kind of different gravity there, or just something in the air that literally drives people insane. That people get to the Holy Land and with the weight of history or cultural literacy or religious background or what have you, feel so overwhelmed that they think that they're Jesus, or they think that they're some character from the Bible, or they just go nuts and start wearing robes and renounce all material possessions. So that's a thing that happens there. And so I thought, okay, maybe the first time I touched the wall, I had this significant experience. That's just, something that happens to tourists. So I touched the wall again, and I had the exact same feeling. I had the exact same experience, the same emotional overwhelm, the same tears. And then I walked away from that. The third time I went back and had the same experience of that electric feeling shooting through my arm, of just being unable to hold back tears. I knew at that moment that there was no question that I belonged to this place, that I belonged to this people, and nobody else was ever going to try to take that away from me again. Or I wouldn't be afraid of anybody taking that away from me again, whether they tried or not. And so, again, this is an expensive cure. I'm not suggesting everybody has to buy a plane ticket to Israel to test yourself on the wall. Some people have that experience. Some people don't. Some Jewish people have that experience. Jewish people don't have that experience. So I'm not saying this has to be the test for you. I just wanted to tell you the point at which I knew. Right? And God willing, at some point in your Jewish journey, you will have that point at which you know that this is yours, that you belong, and no one can take that away from you. The halacha, the Jewish law, is that once somebody converts, they are as Jewish as if they had been born Jewish, and no one can question that. Right? And there might be people out there who stipulate, well, that's just an Orthodox conversion. So I'm going to let people believe what they want to believe in that minority view. But I converted according to the Shulchan Aruch. I had 3 rabbis there. I got a mikveh. I studied. I had my sincerity tested. And so that sense of belonging cannot be taken away from me. And so I'll suggest that if you go through the earnest process of converting to Judaism, and you do it with knowledgeable rabbis of the denomination of the community that you seek to join, once that's completed, you are as Jewish as anybody Jewish has ever lived. You are as Jewish as Avram Avinu, as Abraham, our ancestor, who himself converted, let's say, at the age of 75 years old, right? Lived an entire lifetime without being Jewish, converted, and you are now related, right? And so just first, I'll just pinpoint that in Jewish law, if you convert according to the standards of the community that you were a part of, you are as Jewish as anybody else in that community, and no one can take that away from you. That legal status doesn't necessarily take that imposter syndrome away. What does is showing up. What does is going back to the well. Keep drinking the water, right? Go to services again, right? You will learn the things to do that for some people that feels like the shibboleth or the shibboleth that separates us and them. The more you are involved in the community, the more you will feel at home, the more the community will consider and make you feel at home and won't question your sincerity, your loyalty, your legitimacy, what have you. That's how you get over this, right? And you may have an epiphany moment. I did, right? And that's not for everybody. Your mileage may vary. I know people who converted long before I did and are still kind of asking the question. But the more you put yourself out there in the community, the more you let people see you doing Jewish stuff and loving it, the less people will have questions about you, even stipulating that those questions are legitimate, which they are not. So that's my advice to you. I want to go back to the chat and see if other people have these questions. And let's say we got somebody, we got Sandra from Goa, Israel, from Goa, India. We got Sandra from Goa, India, saying her conversion is going to happen in Israel next year. Baruch Hashem, that's wonderful. Great place to go. Just go straight to that wall. I will say as a postscript, after becoming a rabbi, I was in a community here in Southern California for a little while, had the opportunity to go to the California Science Museum for their Dead Sea Scrolls exhibit, right? Because it was kind of a traveling Dead Sea Scrolls exhibit. And they had not just the Dead Sea Scrolls or fragments thereof, but also a lot of sort of artifacts from antiquity, including a piece that was lent to the exhibit by the Kotel Authority. They had a literal piece of the rock, right? This big chunk of Jerusalem limestone that had been borrowed from the Kotel to go on tour with this important exhibit. And it was placed in a display next to a video screen that was like a live stream of what was going on in the Kotel at that moment. I think it was daytime in LA, so it might have been nighttime at the Kotel, but they had this piece of the rock where you could touch it. And I put my hand on the rock again, and I had the exact same feeling. And so once you get that touchstone, nobody can take that away from you. And so my blessing for you is that by knowing that you belong according to Jewish law, and by showing that you belong, by showing up for others in your Jewish community, that this imposter syndrome will gradually lessen, and it's possible that one day it will completely disappear for you like it did for me. And so that's why I wanted to share this with you today. Like I said, there are people who reach out to me, who learn with me, for whom this is their greatest fear. And so that's why it was really important to me to get on this podcast, to get on this live video feed, to share my story, and to give you some tips to help ameliorate and, God willing, eliminate this feeling. Because, hero, if you are throwing your lot in with the Jewish people, with all sincerity, with all solidarity, with all exclusivity, then nobody can take that away from you. You belong. You are enough. You have enough. You do enough. Just show up, and we will embrace you. So just want to go to the chat to see if there are any other questions right here. It was a little bit of a Captain Overshare there today. Let's see. For me, it's not about... So Fortune Psych says, for me, it's not about feeling accepted. It's about not feeling singled out because no one else looks like me. I am really glad you brought this up. Standing out isn't always positive. IMO. And what I haven't talked about a lot in this particular episode, because it has not been my experience, but I will share what I've heard second or third hand, is the experience of Jews of color. Now, I hesitate because that's not my story to tell. As a big white dude, as someone who is capable of growing a pretty serious beard, right? I get a lot of privilege. I get to just show up and sit down and blend in. Some of the older crowd can, pinch my cheeks and see my goyish apunim, to see my Gentile face. Let's translate that. But I have a very easy time blending into the Jewish community, but I know that people don't. They may look different because of a disability, right? They may look different because of the color of their skin, or how they dress, or where they're coming from, or the language they speak, or the accent that they have. And I want to call this out and name this as a real challenge that people have. And so that's not something I have personal experience addressing, but I will say to all my what's that old Mark Twain word, co-religionists, if somebody's showing up in a Jewish space who's Jewish, you have no right to question their legitimacy, to call them out just because they don't look like the other Jewish people that you know. I've heard terrible stories of like a couple coming into a synagogue where one of the spouses was African American, and somebody handed her their coat, right? Because they thought, okay, she doesn't belong here. She must be here to help for the holidays or something. And that was devastating for her and her spouse, and devastating for me to hear about it. So just if you go into a synagogue space and you see one person who doesn't look like all the other people there, don't assume that they're not Jewish. Don't assume that they don't belong, right? They could be, have converted. They could have been a part of a Jewish family for generations. One of the other nice things about going to Eretz Yisrael, to the land of Israel, is that you see the diversity of the Jewish world kind of concentrated in one place. You see Jews from Europe and from Africa and from Asia and from the Middle East, and Jews from all over who have come there to visit or to live. You see the full diversity of the Jewish people. That's one of the watchwords of the Jew Curious Show podcast, is exactly how diverse the Jewish people is. As one of our guests, Rabbi Brad Hirschfield, said, that the number of ways to the number of ways to do Jewish or to be Jewish is equal to the number of people doing it or being it, right? That's how diverse we can be. So I can't necessarily give you advice on how to feel better if you stand out, but what I can say to people who don't stand out is to be sensitive to the people who do. Do not assume that they don't belong here just because they don't look like you. The fact is, in America, something like, I'm going to guess, 80% of the Jewish population is Ashkenazi, came from a couple of different mass migrations in the mid-19th century and then the late 19th and early 20th century from places like Germany and Eastern Europe. A lot of Jews look alike, right? Or look like they're kind of from the same part of the world. But we have always had within our family people who don't look like that. And so don't assume that because somebody looks different, they don't belong. And I'll just say this once again. If you are born Jewish, you belong. If you convert to Judaism by the standards of the community that you are part, you belong. Nobody can take that away from you. It may feel like they are trying. And for that, I am truly sorry. I apologize to the extent that that is my burden to bear. But just know that with me, you will always be accepted for who you are. And so I hope that's helpful for people. I hope to have more guests, Jews of color, on the podcast, in the show, to share their experiences, because I hesitate to give advice for people for whom I don't have similar experience. But there goes. I still have some responsibility to say to everybody that Anybody who's Jewish belongs in the Jewish community. Anybody who's Jew curious has a right to come to our community and ask questions and participate. That's my opinion. Not everybody agrees with me on this, but I'm taking that stand right now. So let's see what else is going on in the chat. Sorry, I got on a bit of a soapbox there. Somebody says, "Hi Rob, it's easy said. To many, it's all about ethnicity. I'm ethnically Iraqi Arabic, and with me not being far left politically and of an Arab Muslim background, many make me feel like an imposter. I'm not going to deny that that is a reality of what you were feeling. I know Iraqi Jews going back generations upon generations, perhaps to the first Babylonian exile, because that's the same part of the world. But I also know Mizrahi Jews who look like they're from the Middle East, who look, who come from a Persian or Iraqi or Iranian background, and also have strong, let's say, right-wing political beliefs. In LA, that's actually quite common, right? So in LA, you don't see as much of this kind of color differentiation or political differentiation. In different parts of the country you might. That's part of the blessing of Jewish diversity here in Los Angeles. I'm guessing probably in New York and other big population centers as well. And so I'm so sorry you've had that experience. And I know it's easy for me to say that, I'm not, please don't take me to say, just, get over it. It's fine. You do you. But part of being Jewish is having a little bit of chutzpah. Okay, it's part of being Jewish is having that audacity to say, I belong where other people say you don't belong. As I've said before, we have been kicked out of every country that has ever been a country, pretty much. So just our presence is a countercultural move, right? And that's another for me. That if this is your bag, if this is your jam, if this is your jazz, if this is the way you like to think about things, being Jewish and doing Jewish and being a part of a holy community is, in our day and age, a countercultural move, right? Being Jewish is countercultural because we do not live in a Jewish culture wherever we are. Maybe in Israel, but even in Israel, there are ways that say, okay, here's the right way to be Jewish, here's the wrong way to be Jewish, and the, let's say, third to a half of the population that doesn't adhere to that has to, by necessity, be countercultural in order to exist. In the diaspora, certainly, where we are like 0.5% of the world population or something like that, persisting in our beliefs and adhering to our culture is a countercultural move. In America, in Europe, in places that are increasingly secularized, participating in a religious community, doing religious things for religious reasons is a countercultural move. And it takes chutzpah, which is Yiddish, speaking of the diaspora, for audacity, temerity, courage, gumption, if you will. And so I don't want to erase the experience and the pain that you're feeling, but I want to give you the courage and the foundation to say what you need to claim right now is your chutzpah, saying that you belong when other people say that you don't, right? And I have to do that sometimes yet today, and my students have to do that a lot more than I do because I'm way deep inside at this point. But I want to say, as a Jewish person or as a Jew-curious person, you have access to that chutzpah to show up where not everybody else welcomes you necessarily. I'm not saying like bust into a community and try to change it and be different and things like that. But if you want to belong and do what they're doing, then sometimes that takes courage, and sometimes you will encounter resistance. I'm not going to lie to you about that. I don't want to sell you a bill of goods. It's not all easy. But you have access to a tradition of courageous people who stood up, who showed up where other people didn't want them to show up. And that's, I believe, how we have endured as long as we've endured and made the impact on the world that we have made. So I hope that's helpful for people. Again, I'm getting a little bit soapboxy today because this is something that's really close to my heart. So I want to, let's see, So I just want to call out a comment here. Dorothy Sue says, I attached to this, my grandmother's name was Dorothea Sue. So thank you for showing up. You're not my grandmother, but it just, when I see that name, it also tugs at my heartstrings. I'm going to need a box of tissues after this episode. But Dorothy Sue says, I guess I'm lucky that I look like my dad, but my mother isn't Jewish. But I guess I'm lucky that I look like my dad, but my mother isn't Jewish. So I just don't have the nerve to go. I get it. And that again, nerve, that's another good word for chutzpah, right? So dig into, think of your father, think of your father's heritage, think of your father's people and how they struggled and the nerve that they had to conjure up sometimes. You have access to that too. And I know it's easy for me to say, but tap into that nerve, like tap into that chutzpah and give it a try, right? And you will find many communities that will accept you. And so if you need encouragement, if you need permission, you got it. I'm giving you permission right now. I'm giving you encouragement right now. So listen, everybody, we've been learning together for almost an hour now. I really appreciate all the people who have showed up to have this conversation with me, to share their personal story, their personal pain. And I hope that having shared my story, I've given you some encouragement. First off, my one area of expertise is as a rabbi and some facility with Jewish law. So I want to put that right up front as we're in the back, as we're in the closing, that if you are born of a Jewish mother, you are Jewish. In some communities, if you were born of a Jewish mother or father, you are Jewish. If you convert through a process according to the standards of the community that you want to belong to, you are Jewish. You know, you talk to 3 rabbis, you get in the mikveh, you are not hanging on to any other religion. If you are all in, then we are there for you. And nobody can take that away from you. You may not fit in right away. You may not have all the customs down pat that other people grew up with, and that will feel strange. You will meet resistance, either externally or internally. But if you need permission to show up, you got it, hero. I'm giving it to you right now. If you need encouragement, I'm encouraging you right now. So show up. Don't worry about what other people think about you. Somebody wise taught me long ago, everybody else is thinking about themselves much more than they're thinking about you. It's like when you meet bears at the picnic ground, like Yogi, I guess. The bears are just as scared of you as you are of them. So that I'm not going to encourage you to mess with bears. We live in California, we've got bears in the woods and stuff. But just know that people are much more worried about how you think about them than how they think about you. So I hope that is helpful as well. I'm going to wrap this up here in just a second. Let's see. Dorothy Sue says, I'm glad you like my name, but I've been called Dodie my entire life. And if I can just share this with you, that is a very Jewish name. In the sense, if you've been called Dodi, that means my dear one or beloved in Hebrew. It's part of our Friday night service where we sing this song called Lacha Dodi, which means come my beloved. When we beckon in the Shabbat bride or the Shabbat queen, when we welcome Shabbat, we sing this song Lacha Dodi, which means welcome my beloved. So if you're a little bit nervous about showing up at a synagogue space, just say your name is Dodi. Or I don't know how you pronounce it or where you're from, but just say your name is Dodi, and people will say, oh, welcome, my beloved. So maybe that'll happen to you, maybe it won't. But if I ever see you in public, say, hey, it's me. And I'll say, hey, beloved, what's going on? So thank you all for joining me. I'm going to do some more of my podcast voice stuff here as part of this live studio recording. And that is, hero, I want to thank you for listening to this podcast. I was delighted to share my story with you today, give you some advice that I have, speak with people who showed up live for this recording. If you'd like to show up live for this recording, please consider subscribing to the Rabbi John Carrier YouTube channel. That's where we are doing these live studio recordings. And by subscribing, you will see what recordings are coming up that you can take part in. And when you ask your questions, you're not only getting your questions answered, but you're getting the same question answered for anybody else who's listening. So I highly encourage you to do that. If you would like to know more about what we've been talking about, I'm going to put some additional resources on our show notes page. That will be found at jewcurious.show/episode 32. Again, that's jewcurious.show/the word episode, the number 32. One last favor I want to ask of you is if you have gotten anything at all out of this episode or another episode of the podcast and you haven't done this already, I would highly encourage you to go to iTunes and leave us a review. An honest review, not looking for an ego boost here. I don't really need that in my life, but I want you to leave the appropriate number of stars and a star rating. And if you will, share a few words about your impression of this podcast, what you've gotten out of it, what you would encourage other people to get out of it. And I ask you to do this because this is how iTunes decides how to tell other people about this podcast. And so I'm saying if you've gotten something out of it, other people might too. And by your sharing your experience, more people will find out about the podcast, come back here and get something out of it as well. If you do that, I would, as we say in Texas, be much obliged. Thank you again for tuning into the Jew Curious Show podcast. And until next time, heroes, peace. All right, gang, that's the live studio recording. I'll stand around here in the green room if anybody has any more questions. We got Dorothy Sue in Los Angeles. High five, Dorothy. If we're ever in Shul together, feel free to come over and say hello. Let's see, we got Hey Girl Steph saying, everyone have a good day. I second that opinion. Jason Brown is shalom. Milo Madsen here from Denmark is with us. So glad. E. Shams from Chicago. Thank you for that brave question. I hope it was helpful. My answers. Kathy says, I know a tiny amount of Arabic, and sometimes it helps figures out the Hebrew word. They are Semitic languages and share that root. Let's see. Drake is in the house. Teresa's in the house. Susan is in the house. Let's see. What's Bud Rod 2 up here? Same here, Sandra. I got stirred just hearing about the electric feeling. Thank you for that. It's not an easy story for me to tell. It's very personal. I don't know if anybody can relate to it, but it's important to who I am. And so I feel like I have to share it with my students in case anybody else can have that too. Ruthie is here. I didn't see Ruthie before. Thank you for being here, Ruthie. Fortune's Psych. Sandra. All right. This has just been a great crowd. I see a lot of familiar faces. Always happy to learn with repeat offenders as the case may be, although you don't offend me whatsoever. And also happy to see new faces in the chat today. So in just a second, I'm going to peace out. If anybody is watching this who didn't get into the chat, you're watching it on the repeat later, feel free to throw whatever questions you have in the comments to this video. I'll get back to you as soon and as well as I can. And with that, everybody, I am going to sign off. I have got to go to a table read of a Purim spiel at the synagogue where I'm an interim rabbi right now. And so I got to wrap this up, go to Pasadena, and sit down and read my part of Bigtan, who is one of the assassins plotting a plot against Achashverosh. But in our version, he is Aloha Verosh, because we are doing a Moana-themed Purim spiel. So if you want to check that out, that's at the Pasadena Jewish Temple and Center coming up next week when we have Purim. So probably not this week, but next week I'm definitely going to do a video, a live Q&A session about Purim. So feel free to tune into that. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to this channel so that you can find out when that's going to be. I think we'll have an excellent discussion about Purim, some stories on drunkenness in the Jewish tradition, some stories about sometimes I share the halacha of the kashrut of wine, which is a very important subject to me. But we'll talk about the 4 mitzvot of Purim. We'll talk about different stories of how Purim's been celebrated. And certainly I'll be here to answer any questions that you have about the holiday of Purim. Once again, everybody, it's always my pleasure to learn with you. And until next time, peace.